Here is something archaeologists confirmed this year and almost nobody is talking about. There is a single field in Sudan with more pyramids than in all of Egypt combined, not scattered across a country, one field. And it is only the largest of three. The kingdom of Kush, sitting south of Egypt along the Nile, thriving in the desert most atlases leave blank, built its pyramids steeper, faster, and for far longer than its northern neighbor. A resurvey of the sites at Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru using ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and direct excavation of sealed chambers has now made the count undeniable. Kush built more pyramids than Egypt, substantially more. And it kept building them for over 1,000 years after Egypt stopped. That used to be a footnote. Something was always going to drag it out of the footnote and onto the front page. This year, that something turned out to be what was found inside the chambers nobody had opened yet, and it was not what the excavation teams were looking for. I want to be careful about what that sentence means, because the reasonable assumption is already forming in your head, and it is wrong. The reasonable assumption is that Kush was a province of Egypt, that its pyramids are Egyptian pyramids built in a different postal code, that we are quibbling over borders. This is the version most people carry, if they carry anything at all, and it is the version textbooks reinforced for the better part of a century. The border between Egypt and Kush was porous. The two civilizations shared gods. They shared a river. For a period, they shared a throne. An X-ray of the archaeological record removed any remaining ambiguity. The pyramid fields of Kush contained architectural conventions, burial practices, funerary inscriptions, and dynastic sequences that were not derivative. They were parallel. That word matters. Parallel, not downstream, not imitative. Two civilizations on the same river, developing the same monumental form, according to overlapping but distinct traditions, for a combined span of nearly 3,000 years. And for a substantial portion of that span, it was Kush that was ascendant, not Egypt. There is a period running roughly from 744 to 656 BCE when the kings of Kush wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. They ruled from the Delta to the Fourth Cataract. Egyptian pharaohs of the 25th dynasty were Kushite men, buried in Kushite pyramids in Kushite soil according to Kushite custom. This is not disputed. This has never been disputed by anyone who works in the field. But somehow, in the story most people receive, it drops out. The 25th dynasty becomes a strange interlude, a brief foreign chapter, and then the narrative resumes as if nothing had happened. The new survey does not permit that anymore. Because what the survey has done, and this is the part that changes the picture, is establish that pyramid construction in Kush did not merely coincide with Egyptian construction, it outlasted it. By almost a millennium, the last Egyptian pyramid of any significance was built around 1500 BCE. The last Kushite pyramid was built around 350 CE. Sit with that gap for a moment. When the final royal pyramid was being sealed at Meroe, the Roman Empire had already existed for 4 centuries. Christianity was legal. The pharaonic tradition in its Egyptian homeland was a memory maintained by tourists and antiquarians. And in Sudan, kings were still being buried under stone points, still commissioning inscriptions in a script Meroitic that we have only partially deciphered to this day. That last detail is worth pausing on because it undoes something quietly. We tend to think of the ancient world as legible. We think of it as a place where the difficult work of decipherment has been done, where Champollion cracked the hieroglyphs, where the Rosetta Stone opened the door, where the story is now largely known and we are filling in details. Meroitic breaks that comfort. It is a script we can read phonetically. We know what the letters sound like, but the language they encode remains only partially understood. Vocabulary is fragmentary. Grammar is inferred. There are royal inscriptions sitting inside these pyramids that we cannot fully translate. Whole biographies of kings and queens, chiseled into stone by people who intended them to be read forever, are silent to us. The lead epigrapher on the current re-survey confronted the language question directly because that is where the entire chronology could collapse. If the Meroitic dates on the newly cataloged inscriptions were wrong, the outlasting Egypt claim would fall apart. So the team cross-referenced every datable inscription against carbon samples pulled from the burial chambers themselves, organic material from wrappings, wooden fragments from grave goods, residues from offering vessels. The dates aligned. The pyramids that appeared to be late really were late. The tradition really did continue into the 4th century of the Common Era. Which brings us to the count. The number that has been circulating that Kush built more pyramids than Egypt is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a specific tally, and the new survey has revised it upward. Egypt, across its entire pharaonic history, built somewhere between 118 and 138 pyramids, depending on how one classifies certain smaller queens' pyramids and satellite structures. The exact number varies by source, but the ceiling is well established. Kush, across the sites of El Kuru, Nuri, Gebel Barkal, and Meroe, has yielded over 250 confirmed pyramids. The recent survey added 12 previously unrecorded structures at Meroe alone, buried under sand that had shifted over centuries, invisible until radar penetrated the surface. 250 is not a close call. It is roughly double. And the geography of that number tells its own story. The Kushite pyramids are not scattered. They are clustered in dense necropolises, sometimes with pyramids standing shoulder to shoulder, their bases almost touching. The northern cemetery at Meroe contains more than 40 royal pyramids in a single field. The western cemetery, next to it, contains dozens more for nobles and family members. Nuri, upstream, holds the pyramid of the great king Taharka, the same Taharka who ruled Egypt as pharaoh and who chose to be buried not in the Valley of the Kings but in his ancestral homeland, under a pyramid larger than anything the Egyptians had built in nearly 1,000 years. Think about what that decision means. A man who wore the double crown, who sat on the throne of Ramesses, who commanded the temples of Karnak, chose the soil of Kush for his eternity. Not because Egypt rejected him, because Kush was home, and home was where the pyramids were meant to be. The architectural differences between the two traditions, once you know to look for them, are unmistakable. Egyptian pyramids, at their peak, were massive and broad. The Great Pyramid of Khufu covers 13 acres at its base. Its faces climb at roughly 51 degrees. It was designed to overwhelm through volume. Kushite pyramids are smaller and steeper. Their faces climb at angles between 68 and 72 degrees. They rise like blades. Their bases are compact, often less than a tenth the footprint of the largest Egyptian pyramids. They were not designed to overwhelm through mass. They were designed to concentrate, to point, to gather the ceremony of a royal burial into a sharp vertical statement rather than a horizontal one. And they were designed with an attached feature that Egyptian pyramids lack, an offering chapel built directly against the eastern face, with its own doorway and its own interior program of relief carving. The chapel was where the ongoing cult of the dead king was performed. Priests entered, made offerings, recited inscriptions. The pyramid itself was closed and inaccessible. The chapel was the interface between the living and the buried. This is a different theology of death. In Egypt, the pyramid was the tomb and the machine of resurrection combined. In Kush, the pyramid was the marker, the chapel was the machine. Two civilizations, same monumental form, different logic. The burial chambers themselves are cut below ground, beneath the pyramid, and reached by a descending stairway that begins outside the structure. This is a Kushite innovation. Egyptian pyramids from earlier periods had internal chambers, reached through internal passages, sealed inside the mass of stone. Kush moved the chamber underground and separated it, structurally, from the monument above. The pyramid became, in effect, a headstone. This year's excavations opened 3 of these subterranean chambers for the first time in the modern era. The contents have not yet been fully cataloged, but preliminary reports describe what one team member called, in an unguarded moment to a journalist, an entire economy of the afterlife. Iron tools, bronze vessels, ceramic imports from Ptolemaic Egypt, from the Roman Mediterranean, from as far away as India, glass beads whose composition matches production centers in the Levant, textiles preserved by the dryness of the tomb, dyed in colors that had not seen light in nearly 2,000 years. The trade implications alone rewrite a chapter of the ancient economy. Kush had been understood, in the older story, as a peripheral supplier. Gold, ivory, ebony, and enslaved people flowed north out of Kush into Egypt and the wider Mediterranean. This was the extractive relationship the Egyptians recorded, and it became the frame through which Kush was seen. A source of raw materials for someone else's civilization. The tomb contents shred that frame. What is coming out of these chambers is not a supplier's inventory. It is a consumer's inventory, the material culture of a wealthy, connected, cosmopolitan elite that was importing from 3 continents. Kush was not the periphery. Kush was a node. It sat at the junction between sub-Saharan trade networks and the Mediterranean trade networks, and it drew from both. The iron in particular has provoked a specific argument. Meroe sat on abundant iron ore, and by the last centuries BCE, it had developed large-scale iron smelting. The slag heaps around the ancient industrial quarters of Meroe are visible from the air, enormous mounds of black waste, the residue of centuries of production. Some historians once called Meroe the Birmingham of Africa, a phrase that has aged poorly but captured something real. This was one of the major iron-producing centers of the ancient world. The new survey has cross-referenced the iron artifacts from the newly opened tombs against the slag deposits, and the metallurgical signatures match. The tools buried with these kings were locally produced. This was not imported prestige metal. This was a sovereign industrial base, producing at scale, supplying a royal court that could afford to bury working iron with its dead. Which raises a question the older narrative had no way to ask. Homo sapiens has been anatomically modern for at least 150,000 years. The engineers who calculated the angles of these pyramids, the metallurgists who managed the furnaces at Meroe, the epigraphers who composed inscriptions in a script we have not yet fully cracked. These were not people operating at some lesser cognitive tier. They were, in every measurable sense, our contemporaries in mind. The gap between them and us is a gap of tools and accumulated knowledge, not of capacity. When we look at what Kush built, we are not looking at the achievement of a less developed people. We are looking at the achievement of people exactly like us, working with the materials and inheritances they had. The reason the story felt smaller for so long is not that the evidence was smaller, it is that the attention was. Egyptian archaeology absorbed the funding, the expeditions, the museum acquisitions, the popular imagination. Sudanese archaeology, for most of the 20th century, worked with fractions of the budgets. Access was harder. The political situation was more complex. And there was, underneath the practical constraints, an older intellectual habit that treated the pyramids north of the border as the real ones, and the pyramids south of the border as derivative. The resurvey is not a discovery in the sense that no one knew these pyramids existed. Meroe has been on maps for centuries. Frédéric Caillot drew the pyramids in 1821. Giuseppe Ferlini, in the 1830s, notoriously dynamited the tops off dozens of them looking for gold, and found some jewelry now sitting in Berlin and Munich, taken from tombs he destroyed to reach. The rediscovery is not that the pyramids are there. It is that the full weight of what they represent has finally been quantified in a way that cannot be brushed aside. More pyramids, longer tradition, independent architectural logic, local industrial base, cosmopolitan trade, a period of direct rule over Egypt, a script we still cannot fully read. Any one of those items would justify a reassessment. Together, they demand one. There is one further finding from the resurvey that deserves attention on its own because it complicates any tidy story we might want to tell. Among the 12 newly documented structures at Meroe, one is a queen's pyramid. The chamber below it contained the remains of a woman buried with royal regalia. The inscriptions in the associated chapel identify her by title, a title translatable, roughly, as Candace. The term Greek and Roman sources rendered as Candace, and used as if it were a personal name. It was not. It was an office. Kush had a tradition of ruling queens, women who held sovereign power in their own right, and this queen's pyramid is one of several confirmed examples. The body inside the chamber had been subjected to funerary treatment consistent with the highest royal status, but it had also been subjected, according to the preliminary osteological report, to something else. The skeleton showed signs of injuries sustained years before death, healed fractures, evidence of a life that had included violence at close range. This woman had not lived a ceremonial existence. She had, at some point, fought. The Kandakes are recorded in classical sources as having led armies. One of them fought the Romans to a negotiated peace after Rome moved south from Egypt in the 1st century BCE. The bones now emerging from the sand at Meroe are consistent with that record. The office was not decorative. The women who held it commanded soldiers and, when necessary, took wounds. Inside a civilization that built more pyramids than Egypt, that ran one of the ancient world's great iron industries, that traded from India to the Mediterranean, women held sovereign military authority as a recognized institution. That combination of facts sits without commentary in the record now. No neat resolution follows. I want to close by returning to the pyramid I asked you to picture at the beginning. It is still standing. Its faces still climb at that steep, impatient angle. The desert around it is still quiet. If you flew over the Meroe necropolis today, you would see the field almost exactly as travelers described it 200 years ago, minus the tops that Ferlini removed, plus the 12 additional structures the radar has now confirmed beneath the sand. The pyramid marks a burial. The chapel beside it, if it survives, was designed to be entered by priests who would recite the name of the buried king or queen and keep the memory alive through repetition. This was the theory of eternal life the builders held. Not that the body would rise, that the name would be spoken, that someone, generation after generation, would say the words. The priests are gone. The chapels are open to the wind. The names, for most of these pyramids, are either partially deciphered or entirely lost, sitting inside the script we can pronounce but not translate. The theory of eternal life the builders held has failed in the terms they set for it, but it has not failed entirely, because a survey team in the 21st century walked into a chamber that had been closed since Rome was a young empire and did the work of reading what could be read and dated what could be dated and counted what could be counted. And the count came back higher than the older story allowed. And a queen who had been buried with healed fractures in her ribs was cataloged and photographed and entered into a scientific record that will now travel further than her own priests could have traveled in a lifetime. The names are still mostly silent. The pyramids are not. More than 250 of them along the Nile standing in the sand at an angle steeper than anything Egypt built, in a tradition older and longer than most people knew existed. Built by a civilization that ruled Egypt for nearly a century, industrialized iron before most of the ancient world kept its own script, kept its own kings, kept its own queens, and outlasted the pharaohs by 1,000 years. The footnote is not a footnote anymore. It is the page.